Fangio called George Floyd's death a societal issue that we all have to join in to correct, but said he doesn't see discrimination or racism as problems in the NFL. Stephen A., what are your reactions to Fangio's comments?
I think it might be one of the most ignorant comments I've ever heard a professional coach make, particularly in the times that we're living in. How he could come out of his mouth and say such a thing, I think that it's just embarrassing. It's ignorant. It's blind. You know, what you got, about 122 teams? How many black owners do you have? You got Michael Jordan with the Charlotte Hornets. Really much you just need to stop there. In the National Football League, we have, I believe it's an Asian-American woman with the Buffalo Bills, Pagula, and, of course, Shad Khan, who's of Pakistani descent, with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Outside of that, you don't have an African-American at all in the National Football League. You certainly don't have one in Major League Baseball. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. And what makes this even more egregious, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to Mr. Fangio, whose resume should be respected, by the way, but where he comes across as so flagrantly ignorant. We are, what is it, a couple of weeks removed from modifications being implemented into the Rooney Rule, because the Rooney Rule, which obviously was instituted originally in 2003, because of the lack of opportunities being accorded to African Americans in the sport of the National Football League, something needed to be done about it. And then 17 years later, they felt the need to have modifications in that very same rule in order to generate even more interest, because they saw how it was being circumvented and navigated around in a very salacious fashion. It was embarrassing, to say the least, and the NFL felt the need to do something about it. All of these things are facts. And Vic Fangio would say such a thing. Clearly, he hasn't spoken to Mike Tomlin, his contemporaries, Mike Tomlin, Anthony Lynn, Brian Flores. Clearly, he's not speaking to assistant coaches, or he's not paying any attention to what they have to say. Clearly, he's completely oblivious to the fact that we only have two African-Americans, GM and Berry in Cleveland and Chris Gray in Miami, where every African-American under the sun is flooding their office with phone calls because they're desperate for an opportunity they sincerely doubt they're going to get anywhere else. And he certainly isn't thinking about ownership within the National Football League, where they've had ample opportunities, as Max Kellerman has pointed out on numerous occasions. Ownership groups, it's a good old boys club. Even if you have the money, they still have to let you in. Just because you have the money doesn't entitle you to be in. You still have to be allowed in. And the NFL hasn't thought about doing that. The Major League Baseball hasn't thought about doing that, really. I mean, basketball, thank God for Michael Jordan and Bob Johnson before him. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened with them. The bottom line is it's just an egregious statement on the part of Vic Fangio. And as far as I'm concerned, he should be embarrassed this morning, because he really exposed either his ignorance or the perverted neglect that he has elected to exercise. It's shameful, period.
I believe Vic Fangio that he doesn't see it, Stephen A. He may not see it. He may be blind to it. He may not have the eyes to see it. I'm going to get to that in a second. You touched on it. 0 black owners, 0 African-American, or very few African-American GMs or head coaches, a percentage of the league, particularly when you see the composition of the players of the league and those with experience playing football. So why does Vic Fangio think that African-Americans are so underrepresented at the ownership level? Is it because they're bad at making money intrinsically? Or may it have something to do with the history of our country? Well, he already said that. He addressed societal issues. Well, what about at the GM level and the coaching level, Vic? What about that, Coach? Why are there so few if it's a meritocracy? I guess they don't merit it. I guess they're not good at GMing and coaching, right? So there's intrinsically something inferior about black people, I guess, if it's a meritocracy. Can't believe that. Or does that go back to the societal issue again? Well, if he says that and then says, but it's a meritocracy in the NFL, that has not, well, but the societal issues affect the NFL. What's the NFL going to do about it? Right? The NFL, he's right, can't change, actually can take steps to change the broader culture, but especially can take steps to change itself. So what does he think the NFL should do about it? The idea of white privilege, the reason it's insidious is because it's invisible to many white people. You have to be made aware of it. So Vic Fangio doesn't see it because he doesn't have the wherewithal to see it. That doesn't mean, by the way, that he's incapable of seeing it. He needs to be educated. And that goes for a lot of white people. They need to be educated and brought into the kind of multiracial coalition that does see it. Increasingly, the younger white people who do see it. And this is not, I'm sure a lot of people out there who don't see that position, white people, think, well, it's black people complaining and fed by kind of white liberal guilt. Well, white people should feel a certain amount of guilt, but this is not some kind of corporate or what they call astroturf when it's not really grassroots creation. Talk to some black people you know. Ask them how they feel about it, especially in the league. And white people who recognize it should take steps to address it. So white privilege originally was described as an invisible knapsack, a backpack that you have that you know is unseen, but you carry it around. Good assumptions are made about you. And that means relative to you, bad assumptions are made about others. Stephen A., you and I argue about this often when you talk about GMs, and I talk about the process, for example, in the NBA with Philadelphia, and you say a black GM would never be allowed to get away with that, tanking for years. And you and I just see it differently. I don't think that the idea of white privilege is white people should give up the privilege. I believe all people should be so privileged. If by privilege you mean that negative assumptions are not made about you because of the color of your skin or the group you belong to. And I don't mean to mischaracterize what you're saying, Stephen A., if that's the case, but you'll respond, I'm sure. But Vic Fangio, I'll bet, doesn't really see it, and that's the problem.